and welcome to How to Make a Pollinator Garden. We are going to talk about why pollinators are important, how to build your pollinator garden, and I'm going to give you a list of plants that are great for a pollinator garden. And then I'm going to give you an at-home activity where you design your own pollinator garden. And then I'm going to give you some resources, some books, some websites, some things to look up more information about our lovely pollinators. So let's start. This is one of our lovely pollinators in our food forest, the honeybee. And she's got legs loaded with this orange pollen from our lovely lavender bushes. So let's talk first about why pollinators are important and who are pollinators. So there's lots of pollinators out there. They include bees, which you see most often, and butterflies, which you see most often, but also other insects like beetles and flies can be pollinators. Birds, our most common pollinating bird is a hummingbird, but also bats. Bats are also pollinators. So there's lots of pollinators out there. And without these pollinators, we wouldn't have flowers or fruit or many of our vegetables that we eat. Most of our food crops, fruit and vegetables, need to be pollinated by some sort of pollinator, whether it's a bird or a bee or a butterfly. And they're declining at an alarming rate due to pesticide and herbicide use, pest control chemicals. So when people spray honeybee nests that form under their deck, they're killing these pollinators. So those kind of pest control chemicals. Destruction of their habitat, they're losing habitat. We're wiping out fields of flowers to put in lawns or to build houses or to build shopping centers. And we're not returning that habitat once we've built. So we're inserting all of these lawns across America, and instead of lawns, we should be building pollinator gardens. So loss of habitat, loss of food. I mean, because of the destruction of their habitat, we're wiping out the flowers that they need to survive and that they need to eat. So they're losing their food. They're losing their nesting sites. That also comes with destruction of habitat. So a lot of our bees, when we think of bees, we think of honeybees that live in hives, that live in trees. But there's all of these other bees, like mason bees and carpenter bees and leaf-cutting bees. They actually nest in wood or in the underground, and they're losing their nesting sites because of the way that we landscape. And also, the biggest thing is climate change. They're having a hard time adapting to these severe droughts that we have here in California. So a lot of these things are contributing to the downfall of pollinators, and pollinators are important. Without them, like I said, we would not have food. So what can we do to help these guys out, these beautiful butterflies and these beautiful bees? The easiest and best thing you can do is to create more habitat for them to thrive. And by doing that, you can create a lovely habitat, create a pollinator garden. It's beautiful to look at and it's helpful for our pollinator friends. So it's a win-win. The more grass, the more lawn we can get rid of and replace with food crops, or by growing our own food, or by putting in a lovely pollinator garden, the more we can help. Also, not spraying any chemicals of any kind, and building a bee house or a butterfly habitat to help these guys survive, giving them nesting sites so they have a chance at survival. But today we're going to talk about the easiest and best thing you can do, which is building a pollinator garden. So how to make a pollinator garden. So how can you build one? And it's very easy. You can do this in a tiny little flower pot. You can do this in your whole backyard. You can design it in your front yard, in your backyard, in your side yard, in a window box, on a balcony. You can build these gardens anywhere with as little space as you want. You can also build them on top of rooftops. So rooftop gardens are awesome. So the first step is to research native pollinator plants, because a lot of our native pollinators, like our native bees, rely on native plants, plants that have grown in your location since before we existed. So researching the native pollinator plants and focusing mainly on the native plants is super important. Choose a space, whether it's a flower pot, a balcony, a rooftop, a backyard, a front yard, a side yard, however big or however small. You want to choose a space. Then you want to choose a design. And thinking about the design, you want to think about what's best for the pollinators. And pollinators don't like lots of space between the flowers, so you actually want to place the flowers really close to each other. You want them to be able to hop from plant to plant very easily. They like that. So if a lot of flowers are concentrated together, they like that. You also want to plant the same type of flower in large groups. So you don't want to plant just a whole field of sunflowers because that doesn't give them variety in diet. But you want to clump the sunflowers together and then say clump the lavender together next to it in very short distances. So make sure you also have flowers that are flowering from spring through autumn because pollinators need some sort of flowering plant to feed on from spring to summer. A lot of flowers only flower for a very short amount of time, and then the bees and the butterflies are like, where's my food? So you want to research which flowers will bloom from spring through autumn and choose a variety of those to give them a varied diet. And then include medicinal herbs. I like to believe that the bees and the butterflies and the hummingbirds, they all use a variety of medicinal herbs as their food, but also as their medicine, just like we do. So things like thyme. Thyme is a wonderful pollinator plant, and I believe they use those essential oils in the thyme as a way to protect themselves from disease. And like I said, variety is best. No one wants to live on just almond trees, right? No one wants to live on just cookies. As lovely as that sounds, we wouldn't survive, and neither would the pollinators. They need a variety. So variety is best as much as you can. Plant in large clumps of the same flower, make the flowers close together, and you're good to go. So let's meet some of the plants, and if you're here in California, I'm going to give you a list of California native plants. These are a lot of plants that we have here on our food forest and that we're trying to grow more of for the native bees as well as our honeybees that we have here. But I'm also just going to go over other common flowers, medicinal herbs, and edible plants that you can add to your pollinator garden for the pollinators. So here's some California native plants. The California lilac, which is a ceanothus plant, is down here, and I'll zoom in on this. White sage, which is right here, and I'll zoom in on that as well. The white sage is actually endangered. It's been over-harvested for ceremonial use and for all sorts of things. So it's actually really great to plant in your garden because you can help with the endangerment of that species. You can help regrow it. California sage is another one. It's in the same family. They're both sages, but this is California sage, and I'll zoom in on that. California asters are great. California sunflowers are great. Yarrow is a wonderful plant, and I'll actually talk about that more in the medicinal plants, but yarrow is native to California. The California redbud tree, it can grow quite large over time, so it's considered a tree, but it has these beautiful blooms that the bees just go nuts for. California wild rose and California poppies are wonderful pollinator plants. So this is the California lilac. I apologize for how blurry it is, but this is a little bumblebee. The bumblebees, the native bumblebees, absolutely adore the California lilac, and they come in big bushes, and they come in ground cover. So ground cover is where they just spread out across the ground. They don't grow really tall, but they come in many different varieties, but California lilacs are wonderful for pollinators, even for the native bees. This is white sage, and I apologize, a lot of these pictures don't have blooms yet because it's still early in the season. So this white sage is getting closer and closer to blooming, but it blooms in late spring and early summer, so it hasn't bloomed quite yet because we're only at the end of April. So this is California white sage. It smells divine, and the pollinators go crazy for it. And this is California sage. This is a large bush, and you can let it grow super duper large, or you can cut it back. But it's got all of these stalks of flowers that come off of it, and they have individual tiny little flowers all over it. So it's a wonderful, wonderful plant. All of the pollinators, from butterflies to hummingbirds to native bees to honeybees, just are all over this. California sage. And this is wild rose, and I apologize again, it has not bloomed yet, so you can't see the wonderful blooms, but this is a California rose, wild rose, and they are like a light pink in color, and they don't look like your typical rose, but they smell divine, and the pollinators love them. Okay, so common flowers, a lot of these common flowers you'll see in people's gardens, and once again, not all of them are blooming in my garden because they bloom at different times. But sunflower is the biggest one. I mean, the bees just adore the sunflower. They will spend hours on the sunflowers. Asters, butterfly bush, any type of salvia. Salvias are in the sage family, and there's just a wide array of salvias. I have 2 types. Both are really good for hummingbirds. They have these red flowers, and I'll talk about that here. This is salvia down here. Nasturtiums. This is nasturtiums, but they haven't bloomed yet. Love nasturtiums because they're also edible. Love to put them in salads. Lilacs, any type. So I talked about the California lilac, but this is another type of lilac bush. The lilacs smell divine, and the butterflies love lilacs. Zinnias and fuchsias are also other types of flowers you can plant in your garden for pollinators. So this is butterfly bush. Once again, it has not flowered yet. It should flower late spring, early summer. But it's beautiful, and it's got these silvery flowers, and it grows into this big bush that flowers, and it's wonderful. This is a type of salvia mixed in with some of my lovely local weeds. But they have these beautiful flowers, and once again, very fragrant leaves. And the hummingbirds go nuts for these red salvias, these red flowers on these salvias. And this is nasturtium before it's flowered, but you can get the vining type, you can get the bushy type. They tend to spread everywhere, but you can cut them back. Like I said, they're edible. Flowers are edible, leaves are edible. And this is the lilac that this lovely painted lady during the painted lady migration is getting nectar out of with her lovely proboscis. All right, so medicinal herbs, good for you and good for pollinators. So some of the best ones are comfrey, which is right here. I'll talk about comfrey. Loved by the bumblebees for sure. Both honeybees and bumblebees, but mostly bumblebees. Thyme. Thyme, I would say if you're going to grow any medicinal herb for the pollinators, grow thyme. I really do believe it's a medicine for the bees as well as people, and it's also great in cooking. Thyme, lavender, oh gosh, the bees are all over the lavender. Native bees and honeybees. Yarrow, just saw a bunch of native bees on it yesterday. It's this white flower right here. Borage, right here. Pineapple sage, mint, lemon balm, rosemary, bee balm, mullein, calendula, fennel, and vitex, also known as chasteberry. All of these are great medicinal herbs, easy to grow, and the bees just love them. They're all over them. So this is borage. You can see this little bee on it. It's covered in bees. This tends to spread everywhere too, so you might have to pull some of it up and cut it back. But it blooms if you give it water from spring through summer. It is one of the fastest flowers to replenish its nectar. So it can replenish its nectar within 15 minutes. So the bees love it. Native and honeybees. And they have these star-shaped flowers that are edible. And the leaves and the flowers kind of taste like cucumber to me. So you can put them in salads. And they're a medicinal herb for anxiety and depression. It's kind of like an uplifting herb. And this is comfrey, and these are the little flowers. This is my only comfrey plant right now that's bloomed. The other ones are a little further behind, but the bumblebees just love these flowers. Rosemary, this is the end of the blooming season for rosemary. You can see these tiny little purple flowers. This is where the flowers were, but rosemary is a wonderful herb. The bees absolutely adore rosemary. Lavender, oh my goodness, lavender, you'll see hummingbirds, you'll see all sorts of bees, and they grow in these big bushes. You can cut them back as small as you want or as large as you want. This is thyme, little honeybee on the thyme. This is flowering right now. Great spring herb for the bees. And this is yarrow, which I actually haven't seen any honeybees on. I've only seen native bees on. I assume honeybees like them too, but I've only seen the native bees on them so far. All right, and then edible plants. I mean, there's all your food crops require pollinators. So if you're interested in making a food forest like we have here on our property, you can add a lot of these, and it's good for you and it's good for the pollinators. But like I said, make sure there's a variety. They need a variety in their diet. We don't want monocropping. Monocropping is another problem that's making pollinators decline rapidly. So blueberries, apple, pear, peach, lime, lemon, apricot, plum, cherry, almond, these are just a few. This is my lime tree with the lime blooms, and it smells divine in the spring, and the bees are obsessed. So are the hummingbirds. This is apple blossom. This is blueberries. These are mainly for bumblebees. I haven't seen any honeybees on them. It's mainly for the native bumblebees and the carpenter bees. Absolutely love the blueberries. They are all over the blueberries. And then I love this picture after they fruit. I just love the the color of the blueberries before they turn blue or purple. All right. So that's the gist, and I have a list of all of those plants for you. So I want you to do an at-home activity where you design your own pollinator garden. So it's one that you can actually do if you want. Something on your front porch, on your back deck, on your balcony, in a window box in your apartment. Or you can design your dream garden. You can just make a design of what you wish, if you had all the space in the world, what your garden would look like. So it's any kind of design. It doesn't have to be complicated, or it can be complicated. You can make an acre large garden and design what you would put where. So I want you to research and list which pollinator plants you want in your garden. You can use the list that I provide in the handout that goes with this lesson, or you can make your own. Make sure you have a variety that bloom at different times, and decide which ones may be useful for you as well. So if you want to add not just beautiful flowers, but maybe a blueberry bush or two, you can choose that. So, or medicinal plants. So decide on a design, and if you're making it large, don't forget to design pathways, any stones you want, any water features you want, benches, tables, chairs, whatever you want. If you want a little sitting area to have tea in your garden, make sure you design that in as well. And label which plants will go where. And I always like to, instead of labeling them with the names, I color code it. So I pick a red for all the salvia, and then I make a little key and I put where salvia is going to be. And you can color it if you wish, or you don't have to. But some resources to help you out. So I have all of the plants that I listed in this lesson. I have on my handout on my website, regenlives.com. So you can use my list as reference. You can also go to different websites. Xerces.org is a great website for pollinator plants. And there's a couple books that are really amazing. And if you're here in California, the California Bees and Blooms is a wonderful book for flowers that are native and non-native, but that grow really well in California. Then there's 100 Plants to Feed the Bees by the Xerces Society, so you can either go to the website or buy the book. And there's Victory Gardens for Bees. And if you're interested in garden design and you want to get more into garden design, The Garden Awakening is my absolute favorite garden design book by Mary Reynolds. She's amazing, and she tells you not only how to design it, but how to care for it, and how to care for it in a natural way. And she's very into working with nature rather than against it, which a lot of traditional landscaping, I feel, and she feels, work against nature instead of with it. And we don't want to bend nature to our will. We kind of want to place ourselves as caretakers within nature, and she's very good at that. So it's one of my absolute favorite gardening books. So you can check that out. But all of those things and these resources are listed on the handout that goes with this lesson. So if you want to, you can make an elaborate garden. If you want to just do a couple flower pots, you can do that as well. But I just wanted to give you guys an introduction on how to make a pollinator garden and what flowers to use. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you go out to your local nursery or your native nursery and you get some plants for our pollinator friends. Thank you so much for joining me.